Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Layla, for coming.
You're welcome.
It was a fabulous read. I did not get to the end, I will warn you, because my mother told me 3 days ago about this. So,
Okay.
so it was a rush. It was a rush. But yeah, am I going to leave the meeting? So I'm just going to kind of ask you questions about the book and your background and what kind of inspired. Is that the structure of the meeting usually, Khaled? Okay. Perfect. Well, so yeah, a little bit of background about myself even before I start this meeting. So obviously I'm Hanan's daughter. And she's been telling me a lot of great things about this book club, but I've wanted to join earlier, but I've just been super busy. I'm a researcher at the Washington Post. So basically I kind of like find people, find documents and work on stories. And my specialty is actually extremism. So especially far-right extremism and domestic extremism in the US. So that's something I'm always keeping an eye out, and that's something I kind of noticed in the book, which I'll get to in a bit. But yes, we have Layla here. Hi, Layla. How are you?
Yes.
You,
I'm
Layla.
fine.
Layla.
I'm fine. Thank you.
How are you? Yeah, so you're good. You're in London right now?
I'm in Aberdeen, Scotland.
Aberdeen. Okay. And could you kind of just tell us a bit about your background and your history and, what brought you into writing even?
Well, I graduated from the University of Khartoum in 1985. I studied statistics, and I went to the London School of Economics to do a master's in statistics and an MPhil. And then my husband got a job in Scotland, in Aberdeen. He works in oil and gas. And basically 1989 happened. And so slowly we realized that we weren't going to go back to Sudan. And I felt I felt very sad about this. And I didn't, because I didn't make the decision to leave Sudan. I had just come as a student. I didn't have a sense of closure. I didn't have a feeling that that this was a step that was in my control. And so I was very kind of ambivalent about it, and I was very homesick, and I was very anxious about my children growing up in a Western country, and all of these things. I didn't have a space to talk about these things because meeting other Sudanese and other immigrants, nobody really wanted to speak about these things. So I turned to writing, and it started off just like a hobby. And then I joined a writing workshop, and people were saying to me, oh, your writing is very good, send it to magazines. And so I started to send it to magazines. And so one thing led to another, and I became more and more, I left the statistics and I became more and more devoted to writing. My early work was about immigration, was about the Sudanese in the UK. Then I started to take an interest in historical novels, and I wrote a novel that was set in Sudan in the 1950s, Lyrics Alley. And then this latest one, set during the time of the Mahdi and leading up to the years of the fall of Khartoum, and then after that up to the British invasion. So I enjoyed researching. I did a lot of research, and so this is what the novel is about. In a way, that's how it's set in that time period.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about kind of this ambivalence about immigration and kind of not being able to go back home. I mean, that's something not to call my mother out here, but I've never been to Sudan. So, we've definitely been raised in a weird kind of space and a detachment from this homeland. And I can kind of see from my parents, there is this longing for a homeland that they can't necessarily return to for whatever reason, whether it's recently because of the strife or just spiritually, they no longer live there, family isn't there. So that's an interesting thing, because that also comes up in the book. I feel like the idea of your homeland, especially with the protagonist, Akwani. But yeah, I mean, for me, this was such an education in history, because I'd heard about the Mahdi, I'd heard about Gordon, I've seen the painting of him getting speared, and I knew that was, there was a brief revolution in Sudan, but never to the level of detail that you described this. I mean, it's really incredible. And anybody, feel free to join in. This should be a conversation between us all. I don't want to lead the whole thing, and I'm sure you guys know a lot more about this than me. So, and feel free to step in, but you said that you mentioned that you chose 1950s Sudan previously. What made you choose this period and the Mahdist revolution specifically? And why now? Why did you decide to write this now?
Well, I was first interested in writing a book about the University of Khartoum. I wanted to write about the building. I was very interested in writing about the building and researching the way it was built. For some reason, for some nostalgic reason, I was very attached to this idea of the building. And that would have been then after the British invasion, at a time of peace and a time of rebuilding, because, you know, Khartoum had been razed to the ground, and when the British then kind of rebuilt it, because it was a city that was first built by the Turks. And then they set up this Gordon College. This was the original idea. But then I went on a fellowship, and then I was discussing with other people, and they said to me, oh, you know, why don't you write about Gordon? Why don't you write, that's a more exciting part of history in Sudan, and that brings together Scotland and Sudan, which is something I'm interested in. So at first I was like, oh no, this is too dramatic, this whole war, and that's not the kind of writer I am. And I, you know, but then I kind of got persuaded into it, and I thought, well, maybe I can do it. And so I, you know, took up the challenge. It felt like a challenge at the time, and I did the research, and I enjoyed it, because I knew the story growing up. You know the story, and I had done it. I did it at school in history. We did it again in university. I had seen the film. I had read The White Nile. I had, you know, it was all around me. This is all the history of if you grow up in Khartoum as I did, it's all around you. So I knew it. But researching it also was pretty special, and it brought up a lot of different information. And of course, I realized once I started the research that what I knew was very much a British point of view, and that I needed to present a more Sudanese point of view, and that the story had always been told, at least in the English language, from the colonizer perspective. So I wanted then, so I was reading in Arabic as well, and sources that were, you know, written in Arabic. And a lot of the British sources were propaganda in a way, because they wanted to build up support for the invasion and the need to avenge Gordon. So there was a lot of things that were published that were kind of had this propaganda feel to it, and they were edited and so on. And then I also wanted to write about the women. I thought the women were neglected from the official records. They were footnotes, and so I used my, you know, imagination and my creativity to come up with these voices for the women at the time. So whenever I found something about women, I would kind of like latch onto it and kind of weave in the creativity, so that the book then has a big number of you know, a big amount of perspective from a woman's point of view.
Yeah, I definitely got that. I mean, all the things you've just described, for example, the perspective that I know it from, or that I've heard, because I grew up in the UK as well. And, you know, I moved to the US when I was, you know, 18, but the perspective was always, you know, this noble martyr, Gordon, Christian martyr, was killed by the savages in the Sudan. And obviously that contrasts. I mean, they didn't really talk about it much growing up in the UK, because it's not a great success of, you know, British history. But then obviously you would hear from our parents, obviously, how this was, you know, a very complex time. And, you know, I don't think I ever, even just reading, I didn't even understand how fractured Sudan was. I didn't realize that there was the Turks, the Egyptians. I didn't realize how diverse it was, and how it was kind of, Khartoum was like a hub for people coming in and out of. So it is very much based in that kind of history. It's you know, it's historical fiction, but there's so much that I learned from it, that I was really put kind of into you know, the scene. And on top of that, the fact that it's women. And I realized, actually, this, no offense to mom and dad, but, you know, the stories we hear very rarely about, you know, our ancestors, or, you know, revolutionaries, they're very rarely about women. And it kind of, there's a detachment that I've had from the story of Sudan, because it very rarely involves women. And so reading about Kwani, reading about Fatima, and kind of, you know, you're able to live through it. You're hearing about their hair being braided, their nose rings. You know, I'm a young woman. They kind of were going through the same kind of, you know, coming of age that, you know, we've been through. And I was like, I've actually don't think I've ever read anything from this perspective. And it's allowed me to understand the story of Sudan and that period much more intimately and much more emotionally than just, you know, men fighting over land, which is what I had heard before. But yeah, so like just to get into the book actually, so I wish I got through more of it, but from what I saw, it was vignettes, so it's sections, chapters. How did you decide on that structure of the vignette? And then also I noticed it switches from perspective. So the psychic distance is different depending on who you're speaking to. And I believe Akwani, she's never speaking from first person, but Yassine is.
Yeah.
So could you tell us about the structure of the book, and how you decided on the vignette structure and switching perspectives and what that kind of adds to the emotional kind of, you know, journey of the book?
Yeah, so basically the main character is Akwani, and she's this girl from South, she's a child, she's from Malakal, South Sudan, from the Shilluk tribe. She's orphaned at a young age, and then her father's young friend, who's called Yassine, he's a merchant, he takes her and her brother in, and then he leaves her with his sister in Al Ubayyad, and he goes to study in Egypt and becomes a jurist, alim. He studies at Al-Azhar. And so the book is really a love story between them. And we follow this love story as they come together and are separated and come together and separated with throughout the years, all the years leading that you know, that go on with the Mahdi's revolution, the fall of Khartoum, and so on. So when I started to write the book, I wanted to write about the Akwani from a first person point of view, but it wasn't very convincing because she was a child and the voice came out as a child's voice, but she was going to get older, and it kind of didn't work out. So I switched it to third person. And then I wanted the variety. There's a lot of other characters in the book. So these are the two main characters, but there's a Scottish engineer, painter who enslaves Akwani. There's Musa, who follows the Mahdi. There's Fatma, the older lady. So there's lots of different characters. So I wanted to have a bit of variety in the voices so that people, as they're reading, they kind of hear a different voice. So sometimes I would have them in the first person. And then also the tenses, I changed the tenses. Some of them were in the past, some of them are in the present, just to give a kind of a variety. And then at the very end, where you get Salha's point of view, it's all in the form of letters. So she's writing letters to her son and to Akwani. And so that gives it also a different voice. So the reader then is hearing this, different voices throughout the novel and getting the different perspectives. Then because the story is sides, there are people taking sides, I wanted also the points of view to reflect the different sides. So I wanted someone who was a fervent believer in the Mahdi. He believes in him, he fights for him. And I wanted someone who was the opposite. And then I wanted some characters who were like caught in the middle, and they didn't really, they were, ambivalent about who to follow. And then I had a little bit of Gordon in it as well. And so there was kind of lots of different perspectives. And I think some people found this, either they liked having the different perspectives or they found it a challenge, because of course it's easier to read. If you're reading a whole long novel, sometimes it's easier to start with one person and go along, rather than, it kind of chops up the reading because you're listening to different voices. Yeah.
I mean, I would love to hear from everybody else. I thought it was very interesting. And I thought, I think the first thing that really struck me, so I obviously noticed that Yassine, he was from the first person, he's very intelligent, he's very independent thinker, he's got a very complex, he believes it's the Muta Mahdi. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
He's the fake prophet, he's a false prophet. And then contrasting that with Musa, I actually thought Musa was such an interesting character because it almost reminds me of the people that I research when I do my extremism research, and just the, kind of the backstory of him is that maybe he's not a particularly significant young man, didn't excel in school, kind of, you know, harbors maybe some weird feelings about a woman he was rebuffed by. I was like, this actually sounds like, you know, I spend time reading manifestos for like far right people, and I was like, the way that this is written, the bluntness of his voice, just the he's so blunt. And I don't want to spoil, I'm not sure how far people have gone, but when his daughter is killed in, you know, gunfire, and his wife is, you know, just, you know, screaming, and it's just the way that it's written, the voice that it's written is, we wouldn't have got that if it came from Akwanyi's perspective. We wouldn't have gotten the, like, she didn't want to go, so I left her, period, move on. And that was just so powerful to me, and it really kind of put the Mahdist revolution in perspective, because I honestly didn't know enough about it, but I knew that there was obviously religious elements to it. There was a lot of kind of debate between the different, you know, jurisprudence and those people, but, you know, it kind of reminded me of kind of like an insurgency, or kind of like a cult of people. And this young man, Musa, kind of one of his followers, one of his, you know, closest followers, kind of, you know, it painted it less as, you know, this Mahdi wasn't clearly just a, you know, a benevolent revolutionary. He obviously had a dark side. He had followers that were willing to do anything, and that's kind of the complexity of revolution, I think, in most cases. But yeah, I mean, I really loved, and then I really liked Salah's the way he talked about how her rounded words, how she was, you know, the intellectual, but she was never quite touched by, you know, the horrors that Akhwani and the other kind of enslaved women had, and the confidence with which she spoke. I think, you know, just these different voices allowed you to understand. It's kind of meta, because it's like, so there's so many different players in this game, and so seeing it from all these different voices really just adds to it. It shows, you know, there's no one perspective, and there's no one person trying to take Sudan. It's everybody.
Yes.
Still is, unfortunately. And so I think it really lent itself to that. But yeah, if anybody else has an opinion on kind of the structure of the book and the way that we had changing voices throughout, yeah, I'd love to hear.
You've read a lot. You've got pretty far.
Yeah, I got pretty far. I just didn't finish it, so I've got like maybe 1/4 left. But yeah. I wanted to. It was like 2 a.m. I was like, I need to go. I need to go to bed.
You're nearly there. You've done a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Just if I don't know how to just straight away jump into the conversation.
تفضل.
ممكن جزء من الكلام أقوله بالعربي لكن عشان
صح.
You can speak in Arabic. I understand mostly.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
My question is, I would see the way Leila wrote the book is really fascinating. In terms of the way she researched the whole things, the best thing I can say from my own perspective is that the way you try to rewrite the history in form of the contribution of the general or lay people in the history, and the way you bring up the whole history and area and land, it was really amazing. My question to Leila was just to give a chance to others. There was a guy, I'm sure she, as all, when in our probably childhood, we read a lot to George Zedan. Most of you might know. He wrote what we call the روايات تاريخ الإسلام, which is simply he write about Islamic history in such similar way. And one of his novels was about Al-Mahdi. He named him Al-Mutamahidi.
Yes.
And I think sure Leila has come across it.
Yes, I read it. Yes.
If you compare, it seems to me when I remember the way I read
أسير المتمهدي.
Yes. At that time, and when I'm reading Leila book now, I could see I was now grown up with Leila book to read when I was young. At that time, I was just fascinated by the love story and the details, but not to the history. But at this time, I would say I learned a lot from the book of Leila in the way of the tribes and how Al-Mahdi and his ways, and I mean, the tribes come, how things went on, and this issue of we could say, all about the lands, the tribes, and how Al-Mahdi was. I think it was amazing that he selected that particular part of the world to start his revolution. It was amazing. I think it was very intelligent way. But anyway, that's my comment, and if you want to.
No, the problem Asir al-Mutamahdi برضو is with the characters are not Sudanese. يعني هما, it's about this. It's about the Egyptian. The characters are Egyptians really, and it's so very much an outsider looking in. The point for this is what I was kind of going against, that I wanted it to be coming from the depth of Sudan and actually starting with Rabha al-Kinaniya, who's a real, in the prologue, she's a real character, she's a real person from history. And this Rabha al-Kinaniya is mentioned in the history books as a footnote, that one of the reasons that the historians are interested in, why wasn't the Mahdi's movement crushed at the very beginning before it grew in strength. And this was one of the reasons given, that he was warned by this woman who was a goat herd. She overheard this conversation that the governor of Fashoda, Rashid Bey, was going to lead an attack against the Mahdi in Jebel Gadir, and so she warned him. She ran through the night and warned him. And so I used this as in the book as I gave her, space, and I started the book with her. So we get this like episode of her warning, warning the Mahdi. So yeah, there's the books that are available. The White Nile is another very good book, but again, it's good, it's nice, but it's very much a British perspective. So a lot of these books had that problem. And so you had to kind of like really go and look for the Sudanese sources, and the best one really was the Muzakkirat Babikr Badri. That was really a very, very good book, because it is very much giving written by Sudanese, giving you the picture, the point of view from somebody who actually fought with the Mahdi and traveled and so on. So that was really a good source for me.
I think Khalid has his hand up. If you want to.
Yes, thanks, Rezan, and thank you, Leila. I have a confession to make, that I have not read the book yet, but I was. I know I shouldn't be saying this. It's on my reading list, and a friend of mine and I have been always. She bought the book and said I must go and buy it. So definitely I would read it. My question is relating to your previous works, Lyrics Alley, Minaret, translator and interpreter. You've been a first-hand observant, or you observed what is going on there, more sort of recent history and people and times that you've been part of. This book, from what I understand from Razan's beautiful synopsis, this is going further back in history, and I quote the word you use, nostalgia, for these historical times. The process of writing this, was it an easier or a more challenging? This writing about an era that you were not part of, does that give you more freedom, or and where you do the research and then you can create a world with no restrictions or limitations, or is it easier or more challenging to write?
Well, when I left Sudan in 1987, and I only went back a few times, and each time I went back, I only stayed for very short times. So the Sudan I'm writing about is the one that I knew growing up, in the 70s, the 80s. This is all I experienced, and I grew up in Khartoum, and I was very fixed in Khartoum all through this time. So I'm very much a product of Khartoum, and it is my city. So that's all I know. So after a while, as time went by, and Sudan, Khartoum even changed. I'd go back. It's different. And I wasn't in touch with the current situation in Khartoum so much. So that became impossible for me to write about it, and it was slipping away from me. And I never. The last time I went was in 2017. I've never been after the revolution. Allahu Alam if I can ever go back. So all this was kind of slipping away from me, and I was losing confidence in my ability to write about the current situation. What I could do is write about the Sudanese abroad. That's still open for me, the diaspora, or to go back in time, which is then gives me the freedom, as you said, because nobody can say to me, oh, you didn't know 19th century Sudan, because they don't know it either. They didn't live in it either. So then I have the research, and that was very enjoyable, you know, actually doing the research. So I did enjoy it very much. It's actually, you know, an enjoyable thing to go back in time and to do all the research. It was
perhaps liberating in a way. Yes,
it is, because in a way I am accessing Sudan without you know, without any issues, without any barriers, because it's more challenging to write about the current situation.
Indeed. Yeah.
If you're not there, you really cannot you know, replicate it in a way that is convincing to others, because you haven't really lived it. So I sometimes toyed with the idea that I should go back. I should maybe, if I go back, if I lived there for 6 months, I could write something that was current. But it didn't happen. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, and I actually just wanted to ask, is, as you were researching, did your perspective on the revolution or the Mahdist movement change at all? Because even as I was reading, you know, with Musa and just generally with the violence, I wasn't super aware of that, and the complexity came through. So, I mean, did your opinions change as you learned more?
Yeah, what is interesting is that actually Sudan was, or Khartoum at least, or to some extent Sudan, was a much more sophisticated place than I was led to believe. So the British and other Western, they like the idea of that, you know, Africa is just this empty place, there's a lot of animals, people don't know anything, and that they came in and that they introduced things, you know, and that it's like a blank slate. This is not true. Yani Khartoum, before the Mahdi's revolution, Khartoum was a very sophisticated city. They had schools, they had hospital, there were churches, there was embassies, there was a palace, there was a printing press, there was you know, boats going commerce to Egypt, to Cairo. There was you know, commerce with Ethiopia. There was communities of different nationalities. There were Jews, there were Europeans, it was a very sophisticated place in comparison to other places in Africa. The ulama who Yassin belongs to were very sophisticated. This man that I mentioned in the book, Sheikh Al-Lamin, the blind guy, he had written books. You know, he was a scholar. He had written books. He had gone all the way to I think the old name of Istanbul to meet the Sultan. So this is a very high level of sophistication. All this was razed to the ground by the Mahdi and his followers, razed to the ground. Then when the British came, they rebuilt, but they rebuilt on a foundation that was already there. I mean, they rebuilt the palace. So that is, to me, was the interesting thing, that actually this the sophistication that was there before, the ulama who Yassin represents, the eloquence with which they wrote the fatwas and the declarations against the Mahdi, very beautifully worded. All of these people were literate. Even the Mahdi was literate, was highly literate. He also, this is another surprise, he was very educated within Sudan. He's somebody who's never left Sudan, but he was also somebody very educated. His letters are very nicely written. He would send out proclamations. People were reading these proclamations. So there was a lot of literacy. There was a lot of reading and writing going around, a lot more than the impression one gets, you know, following the colonial sort of imperialism scenario. So that's it. You get more when you're reading. You get a more idea that there was a lot more sophistication, a lot more complexity, a lot more nuance going on. Of course, there was a lot of very poor people. Of course, there was a lot of illiterate people, but there were also still lots of sophistication that was going on.
Yeah.
So,
Bella, do you have a question? I see your.
أواصل. أنا عندي simple question يعني. Why did you write that book in English? وتفتكري يعني هسي this book has to be translated to Arabic يعني ولا language native language of these people was Arabic. وتفتكري writing it in English يعني I'm glad بالرغم انه I'm glad you wrote it in English يعني على الاقل في ناس كتار قدروا يصلوا للقصه دي. فتناول الحته دي لو ممكن. بعدين this is a historical fiction زي ما يعني فيها fact وفيها created characters يعني. وبعدين الحته الثانيه was you worried about projecting your opinion يعني in one of your character. بعدين what kind of يعني وعالجت الحكايه دي كيف؟ يعني مثلا depiction of موسى as Razan said here يعني انه was less educated حتى his point of view was not discussed intelligently in the dialogue. لو قارنتيها بالpoint of view بتاعت الناس الثانيين الانتي مهديز يعني. السؤال الأخير was you worried about having some real name like الضرير مثلا وعملت يعني بالرغم من الهيستوريكال accuracy اللي لاحظتها شديد جدا وشكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك. لا أنا طبعا I always write بالإنجليش يعني from the beginning I started to write in English and this is because my English is stronger than my Arabic in terms of writing يعني I can read Arabic. طبعا Arabic is my mother tongue. لكن when it comes to writing my Arabic is not strong. فin a way I don't have a choice يعني ما كان ممكن أكتب بالعربي يعني I had to write it in English because the English was stronger. And all of my books have been translated. Every single book and every single story has been translated. And I work very closely with the translators. I read the draft and I correct so I'm very heavily involved and I put a lot of effort in getting the work because I want to reach the Sudanese reader and I want to reach the Arab reader. وحتى this novel, it was دار المصورات were acquiring the rights for the Arabic rights from my publishers in the US and Professor Badruddin al-Hashimi was ready to translate it, but then طبعا حصل الحرب وكده دي I don't know what's going to happen with this. This is in case of the translation. I tried in terms of the perspectives of the book and all that. So yeah, I tried of course to show every perspective in terms of having the character Musa and having different characters. But I think at the end I leaned towards my own conviction, which was I supported the Khartoum ulama. My personal, after researching وكده, to me they were the heroes in the whole story because they stuck to their word. They tested him and they said no, he's not the real Mahdi, and they stuck to this and despite how they were persecuted. طبعا it was very easy to attack them and say you're supporting the government, you belong to the government, you're, as they were telling them, you're supping at the Sultan's table, and they were dismissed as we nowadays. People are always very quick to dismiss the ulama who support the government. Whenever they say something, people really don't take it very seriously. But I felt the genuine, Islamic position that they took was based on what they had studied, what they had learned. It was not just a reaction to someone threatening the government. This was my personal feeling about it, and this is why then I ended up with a hero who was from this class of people. So I think no matter how you try as a writer to be fair and to present things from different points of view, at the very end you will lean on to your own opinion, I guess. Yeah. I think was there a third question? I'm not sure. There was a third question maybe that I missed out on. Is that all?
About the Darir.
About using a real person. About using a real person, you mean? The sensitivity of using a real person?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I liked his character. I felt it was very important. He was a very important figure, and so yeah, he was a real person. As I said, Rabha al-Kinaniya, Hurdun was real. They were the main ones that were real. So Farajallah, he was an enslaved man who became Farajallah Basha. He was actually giving the Bashawiyya by Hurdun. He rose very high in the ranks of the army, and he fought in Mexico, and then he came back, and he was fighting for Durman against the Mahdi, and then the Durman was overtaken, and he had to switch sides and fight on the side of the Mahdi. So he's mentioned in the book. So there were, I did mention a few names. It's very tempting to do that, because you read a lot in the history about these real people, and you kind of like, you feel then that you're writing around them. You've got the fictional characters around them. So that is the bit that was fictionalized, then the conversations between Amin al-Darir and Yassin. So these are fictionalized conversations because Yassin is a fictional character. So all the conversations between them are fictional. But for the whole book, I tried, in terms of the history, I tried as much as I could to stick to the accuracy. I tried, to be as accurate as possible. But there might be, of course, errors, but I did my best. I didn't want to change the history because I thought the history itself was so interesting. Why should I change it?
I think somebody else has their hand up as well.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Hey, thank you for being a host of this nice gathering. I really appreciate your time. And I loved your book.
Thank you.
I recently got into reading historical fiction. We just read The Red Tent last month. And this one was a treat, yours. So thank you so much. I have few comments and maybe questions. I'm not sure how to frame them. The book raised to me the issue of identity, which is a big question for us, part of us Sudanese, that would be mixed and intertwined, and we have different culture, and we from everywhere and anywhere that, we relate to the north, we relate to the south, east, we that mix, very unique mix. So I was touched by the way that she became peaceful with her name, Zamzam, I'm talking about, towards the end of the book. And that's when she knew about Hajar. It is related to Hajar and the holy water concept. Is that because Hajar was a slave too? Is that the connection for you here?
Yeah.
She's a slave and this one was a slave. The other aspect of this is the water, your use of the water. I mean, when we come to this life, we submerge in water for 9 months. So to me, that where you peaceful, that's where you are at most peace, and everything scattered you in the water. And then to us as Sudanese who grow by the Nile, or in some way we have that connection with the running river, it is a source of joy, but it also became the source of pain, because through it the colonialism come through. It brought both joy and pain. So it was the same for Zamzam as well. For her, it is some source of sanctuary, and some place of joy for her, a good memory of her childhood. So that's a good choice of you to relate those points to this area and connect them. So can you explain more on that side? Thank you so much.
Yeah,
offline.
Thank you so much for all of that. Yeah, I don't know where it came from, this image. I had this image of this child in the water and standing in the water, and I think maybe I was influenced by a short story that Abdulaziz Baraka Sakin wrote. He had a nice short story about a girl who was fishing, children who are going in the river and catching the fish by standing in the river. But so I kept this idea of the river, and then of course the character of the Scottish man, he also came to work on the steamers on the river. So it's the river is always very, very important. Part of when I left Sudan, and I used to tell my family that I miss my friends and I miss Sudan, but the answer would be but they're all out. A lot of my friends had left, a lot of my family had left, even in those years, and I was meeting them. I was meeting them in Cairo, I was meeting them in elsewhere. So what is it then that one misses then? So if you're a Sudanese and you're outside and you're meeting other Sudanese in different parts of the world, you're missing the land itself. So there's a connection then to the land that one then then has this connection to the land. And of course, if you're from Khartoum, then you are very aware of the rivers. You're very aware that we have how many waterfronts. Yeah, this business of having these two rivers, and then it becomes one river. You get so many banks of the Nile. You have so many places that are facing the Nile. So that creates a kind of a feeling of connection to the river in a way. So that was really very important for capturing the scenery, capturing the scenery of the book, and also getting the story going. And one of the things I found interesting in the research is that a lot of the followers of the Mahdi who came from Al-Ubayyid, they had never seen a river. So when they started their journey, when they went to attack Khartoum, so they started their journey northwards. So they went towards the river, they went east and then they saw the White Nile, and they were shocked. They had never seen a river before. They had never seen crocodiles. They had never seen any of these things, and so for them it was like a culture shock coming from the West, and then they followed the Nile up north until they reached Khartoum. Yeah.
ممكن معلش اتدخل شوي؟
تفضل.
وآسف جدا يا رزان وليلى لأنه يعني ما بعرف التكنولوجيا كويس، فما عرفت أرفع إصبعي. يا ليلى أنا حتكلم بالعربي لأنك طالما كتبتي عن المهدي معنا بتذكرين الدراويش وجلالي من المرقعة، فنرجع شوية. لكن ما أعرف أتكلم بيات عربي جزيرة ولا عربي الخرطوم ولا عربي كارديف ولا عربي الجريف غرب، وأتكلم بيات عربي ما أعرف. على حال اللي بقوله لكم أقبلوه.
عربي
لا
جوبا.
أقول لك حاجة يا ليلى، أنا قريت كتب كلها ما عدا الكتاب ده، وإن شاء الله حقراه
إن شاء الله.
وحاطلبه للمكتبة العامة، لأن عندنا فيها مجموعة كتب أعتقد إنه في جزء من الروايات بتاعتك موجودة هناك في المكتبة المركزية. كتبت لك مرة موضوع سميته ليلى ليتك لم تفصحي. لو سألتني ليه أنا قلت الكلام ده، في واحدة من بيسموها شنو، واحدة من الاحتفالات بتاعت جائزة الطيب صالح الفزت
أيوة.
فيها، فتكلمت عن زقاق المغنى كما ترجموا لنا الحاشم، وانا قريته بالانجليزي على فكره.
أيوة.
حضحكك اقول لك اشتريته بكم، ب 50 بي من فيكتوريا لايبراري. جيت قاعد كده حارس الباص بتاع كارديف، فلقيته ليلى ده الليركس ما شاء الله. فشلته قريته من الغلاف للغلاف، لكن هو الرواية طبعا قريت أفتكر المترجمة أول مئذنة. شيء بديع، شيء بديع. بس أرجع لك للموضوع عشان ما أطول عليك، وأنا ختفت المايك عشان أنت قلتي ماشي.
لا تفضل تفضل.
قلت لك يا ليلى وعشان ما تبقى قطيعة، قلت لك يا ليلى في نظري، وديتك مثال، قلت لك اديك مثال بالطيب صالح اللي انت يعني قلتي الحاجه دي في مناسبه جائزته وكده. يعني انا لو بقيت يعني راوي ولا قاص، واتمنى يعني لو سالني عبد الله ده ما ان جنة ما بقول له التفاصيل بتاعت القصة والأبطال أو القصة اللي اتقالت أو أسباب شنو أو كده، ده أنا ما أعرف. والحاجة دي أخذتها من الطيب صالح ذاته، قال كانوا بزرزروا فيه ناس عطلة بتاع السعودية ذاك في برنامجه، وحتى جاب له أمثلة لناس حقي قنديل ومهاشم، وبعض الروايات قال له مش في شبه. قال لي والله شوف أنا أنت دار تعرف وغيرك دارين يعرفوا مصطفى سعيد ده منه يا أخي. أنا كتبت عمل نفع الناس قروه ونفع معهم أهلا وسهلا، أنا بكون سعيد. ما نفع معهم والله أنا راضي بالشيء اللي عملته ده. وبعدين يا أخي أنا ليه أحرق عملية يعني أقول لك مصطفى سعيد ده منه. ده الكلام اللي كتبته لك، وبالمناسبه رسلته لك في فيسبوك في صفحتك، كنت معاك هناك لكن ما اعرف لظروف ما يمكن ما تكوني اطلعت عليه وكده. anyway الشيء الثاني بدي اسال عليه، الروايه التاريخيه ما بتتفقي معي بانه الروايه التاريخيه ما زي اي روايه ثانيه؟ يعني يفترض فيها انها تكون ما زي يعني ما زي اي روايه ثانيه، يعني بتحتاج، وانت الحمد لله قلت عملتي ريسيرش، لكن في النهايه برضو الخيال بيلعب فيها دور كبير يعني. لكن ده في السياق، لكن افتكر في الحقائق الراوي لابد انه يكون يعني داير اقول شنو، يعني يكون حريص جدا انه ما يقول حاجه. وانا شايف من الترجمات اللي قريتها للهاشمي للناس اللي قروا الروايه دي من الغربيين، وفي حاجه ثانيه افتكر نزلت عندنا في مجله المهاجر، افتكر مقاله طويلة كده وجميلة كتبتها واحدة أنا ما أعرف هل هي مصرية ولا لا.
أيوة أماني.
أيوة ما أماني الطويل
يعني الصيفي أفتكر أماني.
أيوة برضه يعني عملت نقد جميل، فأدتني فكرة عن الرواية، وأتمنى إنه أقرأ. وشكرا لك، ويعني الواحد سعيد بإنه يعني يقابلك ويتكلم معك، وتحياتي وموفقين إن شاء الله. شكرا يا رزان كمان.
شكرا لك، شكرا لك. لا هي طبعا الرواية التاريخية دي، ما هو الكاتب بيبقى عايش في الحاضر، يعني الكاتب بيبقى متأثر بالحياة اللي هو عايشها. فأنا فعلا زي ما رزان قالت، يعني أنا بديت القصة دي، الرواية دي كتاريخ، ولكن بعد شوية بقيت تأثرت طبعا بموضوع الاكستريميزم والحياة اللي احنا شايفينها، يعني داعش وايسس والحياة دي بوكو حرام والحاجات دي، بقت انا حواليا وانا بكتب عن الحركة المهدية. فطبعا ده اللي بيحصل في الموضوع الرواية التاريخية، انه الكاتب بيكون متأثر بالحاضر، وبيتكلم عن الحاضر، يعني to some extent، يعني الواحد بيعلق على الحاضر. فأنا شفت الباراللز، يعني أنا شفت إنه هو كيف المهدي ده ابتدى إنه هو بإنه حركة وكده، بعدين حصل حكاية التكفير دي، يعني هو قرر إنه الأتراك دي الكفرة، وقرر إن المصريين دي الكفرة، فخلاص بيجوا يعني حلال عليهم إنهم يقتلوهم، يشيلوا نسوانهم كده كده كده. this is a disaster، يعني إنه حصل يعني قتل لناس اللي هم مسلمين. this is the part which is it has the parallels بالmodern day movements دي، إن modern day movements دي they justify الviolence ده بإنه الناس دي ما مسلمين يعني. فدي حاجة يعني أنا كنت كانت at the back of my mind, it was on the back of the writing يعني. yeah. شكرا لك على السؤال ده.
I think Lemya, you have hand up.
مرحبا، مساء الخير.
أهلا.
مرحبا أستاذة ليلى.
أهلا.
to have you في المنصة.
صوتك بعيد يا لمياء.
أيوة معلش يا جماعة، أنا برا لكن بحاول my best. كده أحسن؟
أيوة.
أوكي. طيب أنا دايرة أقول أول حاجة ندخل في العربي، يعني let us color this conversation with our bilinguality. عبر رصيدك الإبداعي السردي، إذا كان في القصة القصيرة ولا في الرواية، دائما الثيماتيك فوكس واضح جدا على أثر الهجرة، الغربة والاغتراب، التأثيرات الثقافية المتبادلة بالغوص في شخوص المهاجرين والمهاجرات وتفاصيل حيواتهم. يعني أنا عايزة أدي أمثلة في متاهة كل صيف، مثلا في القصة اللي اسمها حرمان، مجدي وسمرة، الانعطاف الرئيسية في القصة دي اللي بيحصل فيها توتر سردي عالي جدا، هي اللحظة اللي هي بتسألوا فيها وين سجادتك، سجادة الصلاة، والصلاة التي تجعل اليوم مشدودا إلى 5 أوتاد، والسجادة بعد كده حتى بيتم ترميزها بأنها هي لما تحتل رقعة كبيرة من أرضية الغرفة، الإشارة لأنها برضها بتحتل مساحة روحية ووجدانية، ومسألة إنها يتم طيها بسفر سمرة، كل الترميزة في الحتة دي وبعودته وده كله. لو مشينا للمترجمة 99 اللي فازت بالأمريكان بوكر، بنلقى سمرة الأرملة وعلاقتها مع الاسكتلندي، وبرضه بتقيف بيناتهم الحواجز الثقافية والدينية رغم الكالتشرال كروس فيرتلايزيشن، لكن ستيل بيكون في بيناتهم ده. لما نجي للمأذنة برضه 2005، حالة التأرجح بتاع نجوى، تأرجحها بين الهنا والهناك، بين الخرطوم ولندن، شعوره بالوحشة وبالنفي وبالاقتلاع، وتضاريس الواقع الحياة اليوم في الخرطوم ممكن نقول عليه صعب وضروس، في مقابل خضرة الضفة الأخرى في لندن، وكل ما تلوح به من فرص وممكنات وكل الكلام ده. يعني أنا دايما قاعدة أحس إنه السرد دايما زي ما قلت الثيماتيك فوكس مغذى بحمولات ثقافية ذات طبيعة تربوية ودينيه دائما يعني. وده دائما يعني بتصل له عبر الغوص في تفاصيل حياه المهاجرين وفي التقاطعات اللي انا اشرت لها. فانا ده سؤالي انه العرق بتاع الدين الحساس ده زي ما انت قلتي في اللحظه التاريخيه دي اللي ظهرت فيها طالبان وداعش وكل الحاجه دي، لما تيجي تتعاملي مع العرق بتاع الدين ده في كل اشاراتك له اللي انا اوردتها دلوقتي من الصلاه لغايه في المترجمه والمئذنه والعلاقات، حتى العلاقات العاطفيه وتاثيرها من الناحيه الدينيه. سؤالي الكبير انه ليلى كيف بتتعامل مع الموضوع الحساس ده ودايره تقول شنو عبره؟ شكرا.
شكرا ليكي. انا ما يعني شايفاه انه هو حساس، يعني انا شايفه انه هو مهم ان الواحد يتكلم في الحياه دي. يعني ليه ما نتكلم في الحياه دي؟ لانها دي حياه مهمه وطبعا لما بفتكر الكاتب بيكتب عن الحياة اللي they find fascinating، يعني الحياة اللي هي that find fascinating. فأنا كنت fascinated بالحكاية دي، يعني أنا fascinated بإنه كيف أما المسلمين دول يجوا في الغرب كيف they're going to adapt من الناحية دي، يعني إن هم هيلقوا نفسهم اللغة بتاعتهم، أولادهم ما بيتكلموا نفس اللغة، العادات بتاعتهم maybe they can take it maybe they can't take it. ولكن نيجي مثلا في حكاية الدين دي they have عندهم obligations، يعني إن هم يصلوا ويصوموا وكده في الغرب، and how are they going to pass this on to their children. and فكل الحياة دي كانت بالنسبة لي fascinating يعني، وهي كانت طبعا part of my private life، يعني لأن أنا ربيت أولاد في الغربة. فدي من هنا جات حكاية إن أنا يعني مهتمة بالموضوع ده، وبرضو أدام في الواحد عايش اللي هو الإسلاموفوبيا والحياة دي، دايما كان بيحصل إنه هو الواحد عاوز يدافع، يعني في من ناحية إنه هو يقول لا ده ما صح كده يعني أو كده. فده اللي أنا كان يعني ماشي عليه في الكتب اللي قبل كده. I think المختلف في الريفر سبيريت ده إني يعني أول مرة أنا I'm glad I did this، يعني إن أنا كتبت حاجة critical عن المسلمين للدرجة دي، يعني إن أنا وريت صورة not really positive. يعني أنا كنت في الأول بوري الصورة البوزيتيف، عاوزة أوري الصورة البوزيتيف في الكتابات الأولى لأني حاسة بالهجوم، فطبعا بوري البوزيتيف. وبعدين في الكتاب ده بديت أوري الصورة النيجاتيف، إن في حركات يعني متطرفة وإنه كده وكده وكده. في نفس الوقت يعني وريت الصورة البوزيتيف اللي هي في الكاركتر بتاع ياسين والعلماء بتوع الخرطوم وصالحة، ويعني وريت الصورة البوزيتيف لكن برضو وريت الصورة النيجاتيف. يعني ده كان أول مرة ليا، و I think it's mature، يعني it's part of my maturity as a writer، يعني إن أنا بقيت يعني going more complex، وبرضو إني بقيت feeling إن الريدرز بتوعي بقوا هم أصلاً a lot of them مسلمين، في a lot of them زي رزان دلوقتي اللي هي second generation. فأنا ما محتاجة إني يعني زي في الأعمال الأولى إن أنا بتكلم مع facing directly الغرب اللي هو ما فاهم حاجة و needing إن أنا to give a good picture. I could become more complex. I could become more taking risks based on readership اللي أنا عندي now. يعني I think that's how I see it يعني.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, it was a nuance. I mean, the assumption, I guess, from my perspective is that a revolutionary is fundamentally, I thought the Mahdi that's a great thing. I mean, they're fighting for freedom, they're fighting for independence, they're, you know, anti-imperialist. So this book kind of added the complexity and the nuance that I think I was missing beforehand. And I think that can only be a good thing. You know, there's no black or white. I mean, I think a lot of revolutionary movements are, you know, very shades of gray. It's a lot of violence is used, but fundamentally the cause is right. You know, you are looking for freedom, but at what cost, and what exactly is motivating that push for freedom. So I thought, you know, I don't feel like, oh my God, like the British were right, you know, the Turks, the Egyptians should have stayed. You know, there was never any kind of, especially somebody who's new and still learning about. I never felt that way, because I think originally you always come in knowing, I think the baseline for anybody in our generation is that, you know, we were colonized several times, and it was destructive in many different ways, but understanding the nuances of these movements and the kind of things that push them and the leaders. And I mean, you know, I can't wait to learn about Nasser. Eventually I'll get, you know, we'll get to there. I mean, I haven't reached the point with my parents yet either, but just understanding the nuance and the complexity behind is, you know, even in our religion, is, I think, very important. And so I did think it's tough. I think I can imagine it's hard, but I think you know, when you're reaching audiences maybe my age, we really appreciate the kind of not both sides, but the complexity and the nuance and the, you know, showing the full picture of things.
Yeah, that's really good to know. That's good to know. It's always difficult to pitch it, you know, who are you know, you want a very wide readership that doesn't know much, or do you know, it's kind of it's a difficult thing to pitch, but I guess at the end you're writing what you want to read, and you're writing the kind of book that fascinates you. Yeah.
Is there any more questions from the audience? We don't have any other questions, actually. I did want to ask about, I mean, not to turn this very dark, but you know, obviously with the current situation in Sudan, and you know, just reading this against that backdrop was interesting, because I think there was a line, I wrote it down because it really struck me. It was, I think Yassine says, fighting an enemy is always easier than governing human complexity. And that really does seem to be the case, is that, you know, right, you know, with the situation right now with the warlords fighting each other, basically, essentially, it seems like Sudan, it's harder for anybody to just govern and to take that responsibility, as opposed to constantly, you know, just fighting over resources and land and you know, ancient debts. And so how do you feel kind of releasing this book? You know, I'm sure you planned it before any of this kicked off, but how do you feel with the current political backdrop, having this out there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I wrote it, you know, I wrote it in a very positive time of the revolution, and then it was released in March. So that was, even when the reviewers, even when it came out and it was reviewed, there was nothing like that. But people who are reading it now, they are reading it, as you said, with this in mind. And I can't imagine how they're putting the two things together, because for me, the book was written in a very separate time. So it's, you know, it's I don't know how you can draw parallels. But what I found you know, interesting was that the reaction of the people of Khartoum was similar to the time of when it was threatened by the Mahdi's followers. They were also evacuated. They also felt that, you know, all these people, you know, they don't who are they? You know, they're you know, they're wild, they're this, they're that, they're attacking us. So this feeling of a kind of a sophisticated Khartoum, a cosmopolitan Khartoum, threatened by people coming from the West who are much poorer, much more less well-traveled, less literate, and all that. This is kind of a feeling to me that it's echoing. And the way they are leaving, they left through Egypt, they're living through the Port Sudan. Then that was the same thing. They were also leaving through Sawakin, they were also leaving through Cairo. And then, of course, the Mahdi cut off the Sawakin line. So that to me was kind of echoing the feeling of the character of Khartoum as it is, and how when this fighting happened, we saw so many foreigners. We were like, oh, Sudan has so many foreigners. and they're all leaving, you know, so it always had this cosmopolitan character to it, the city, and it always attracts people from different parts of Africa and the world. And so that kind of for me was the feeling when I was talking to, you know, my family, and the way they felt threatened, and the way the way the houses have been looted, and that is what happened then as well, the same sort of attack on Khartoum. And then but in that time it was considered, you know, the liberation of Khartoum, and it was considered, you know, a kind of it was ideologically driven, and now it's not. There isn't this ideological drive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's even interesting, and I'm just realizing in this conversation, and even with Salah, the wife of Yassine, the kind of urban intellectuals of Khartoum, which, you know, I mom and dad didn't really maybe introduce us to enough of these people. Everyone we knew was, you know, an urban intellectual from Sudan who left. And even this conversation between us now, I had never really thought about kind of this idea that poorer people, you know, from Western coming in, and kind of, there's a very specific, not flavor, but something going on. There's a kind of pattern that kind of repeats itself. And I just have never really thought about that dynamic. And it's a very interesting one. But yeah, I mean, thank you for explaining that. That's, I mean, obviously you didn't expect this all to happen during it, but it definitely, what did you say, Mom? I was thinking about the current situation in Khartoum, what happened more than 100 years ago. Yeah, I mean, there are always going to be parallels, I think, when you have a conflict on this scale. And
yeah, they were prepared, though, the people then, because it had built up, you know, and so people were left before the Mahdi came, and then he warned them. You know, he had Khartoum under siege, but he was telling them, you know, surrender, 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 and he was giving Gordon. He was very you know, he's told Gordon, leave, you know, go back to your country. This has nothing to do with you. And so there was actually more sophisticated than now. This is the sad thing, that then there was a respect for the civilians. There was you know, the Mahdi was saying to them, come out to me, or, you know, there was time, there were warnings, but what happened now was just, you know, just like that. People just got up in the morning, and it was like there was just no warning, there was no preparation, there's nothing. So that's a deterioration in the ethics of fighting, in the war ethics. That is a huge deterioration, sadly. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more comments or questions? Well, thank you for the lovely comments, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you this is very special.
Yeah. And so in terms of looking forward for you, I mean, obviously you've just released this book, and I'm actually really excited. Actually, after we get off this call, I want to go finish it.
Okay.
But what topics interest you? Do you still want to stay within Sudan, or are you know, or do you even want to write anything else, or what's your
I
plan?
am crushed and defeated. I can't that side of me is just needs time to pick itself up again. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
No, I imagine that's a feeling amongst, you know,
yeah, that's a lot of people. Yeah.
People are it's a hard time.
Yeah.
Mohammed said, any plan to make it a movie or series? Well, that'll be fun.
But this is part of the crush and the defeat and all that. Yeah. But I'm happy to think that it can comfort, you know, the Sudanese at this time. And I think that, you know, reading novels and stories is comforting at a time like this. If you can focus, of course, some people they might be too traumatized to actually sit and focus. But if you're at the point where you can sit and focus on a story, then it can be very comforting to read at a time like this. And I'm hoping that you know that the Sudanese will say that they found comfort in it at this time.
Yeah. And of course, it is a story about conflict, but it's also a love story, and it's a beautiful love story at that. And so, we didn't really ask you about that actually. What was, I kind of thought of it as like a Bildungsroman, like a coming of age, because that's kind of where I'm at. But it's a love story. And so, how did you decide to make that the center of kind of, that's the thread that ties this all together, the whole story?
Yeah, it just happened very subconsciously. I really wasn't thinking I'm writing a love story, but then at the end it was like, oh, that's what I've done. Actually, this really is a love story. So it was just, I like the idea of the north-south love story, and also this is how Islam was spreading in Africa, through marriage and trade, which is what Yasin represented before colonialism. And then of course colonialism brought in the missionaries, and the missionaries were, given free access to the south, but not the north, and because the British didn't want the sensitivity, didn't want to upset the Muslim population. So they didn't allow the missionaries to operate in the north. The missionaries operated in the south. And once the missionaries operated in the south, they blocked the kind of slow, very slow spread of Islam that was going to the south through the merchant and through the marriages that were taking place between the northerns and the southerns. So that was kind of what the love story represented to me. There's another question, I'll quickly answer it before we wrap up, and said, does the writer have the right to change historical facts? Some writers do. They take liberties, they change dates, or they change things, or they create meetings. The famous film Khartoum, where they had Charlton Heston as the Gordon, they made the two meet. They had Gordon meeting the Mahdi, which it never happened. So sometimes with these artistic things, people do change the history in order to just have a better story, I guess. But I didn't do that. I really thought I wanted it to be as accurate as possible. Yeah.
You did a great job with that. I think, as a journalist, we're not allowed to do anything with anything, and it has to be completely objective. But I really appreciate that your medium allows you to create, to imagine. I mean, even the stories of the young women, that's really the thing that stuck with me, I think, in this whole thing.
Well, that's good.
I now have kind of an image of a young woman, a young Sudanese woman, several actually, or even young Sudanese women and their roles in a revolution, in a movement. Although we had that obviously with the revolution a couple of years ago, but it's really beautiful. Okay, well, if I'm not sure how to wrap this up, because I think Khaled left and he seemed to be the one who runs these things.
Okay, no, thank you so much. And just to say, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, so please, get in touch about anything. And this is really great. It's been really, really special today. Thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you, Razan, for leading the discussion. You're a natural.
Oh, thank you. My mother sprang this on me 3 days ago, but it's okay. We'll get through it. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been really just an education and really lovely. And yes, excited to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming and for
وقتك يا ليلى.